Hi there, it's Keith from the Evangelical Free Church, and today we're looking at Mark chapter 4 verses 35 to 41. Well, Jesus has come to the end of a busy day preaching, and he decides to cross the lake with the disciples. And we read in verse 36, leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat, and there were other boats with him. Jesus hasn't even had time to refresh himself after all his preaching. But what happens next is absolutely fundamental to our understanding of Jesus. Because from now on, the disciples, who probably thought they knew him, will never view him the same way again. Sometimes you get an insight into a person that does that. I remember being really amazed to hear that during the aftermath of 9/11, that Steve Buscemi, a very notable actor, when he had been acting and times weren't so good, he'd been a firefighter. So he went down to his old fire station and volunteered again to do the sort of looking through all the wreckage and all the stuff that needed to be done. Quite a dangerous job for someone who was a respected and quite well-known actor. It certainly made me look at him differently after that. You saw something of the humanity of the man. Well, what happens next makes the disciples completely reevaluate Jesus. As they're going across the lake, a storm breaks. The Sea of Galilee is the kind of area that attracts storms. I remember some years ago, some people had been to Israel, and I saw a photograph, and they showed a photograph of the lake when it is beautiful and calm. And then they said this was half an hour later, and they showed a furious storm on the lake. And it says, verse 37, a furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Jesus is totally worn out. That's one thing we can note. The disciples are totally terrified. And we've got to remember, some of them were fishermen. This is a major storm. No doubt they'd seen rough water before, but this is something different. What is Jesus' reaction? Because it's quite extraordinary. Well, we see this, verse 39. He got up and rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Be quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. It didn't slowly get calm, it suddenly got calm. And this is really unnerving. He then turns to his disciples, verse 40, and says to them, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" What's the disciples' reaction? Well, it's an interesting one. Verse 41, they were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." They are terrified. You see, we hear this story and we think, well, that's a useful trick, isn't it? It's a bit like a conjurer at a children's party. But this is far more profound for them. You see, they knew who controlled the weather. They would have remembered their Old Testament, as we call it today, their Bible. And they would have remembered when Elijah had gone to the wicked King Ahab and said, "There be no rain at my command, because God says so." And he's actually quoting some of the law from Deuteronomy, chapter 11, verse 17, where it said if the people were disobedient, God would withhold the rain. And so here they see Jesus controlling the weather, and their minds almost certainly would have gone to Psalm 107. And it says this in Psalm 107, it's very notable. Verse 28 and 29. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. He stilled the storm to a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed. What had they just witnessed? They'd witnessed exactly that. They were terrified. They knew what it was as Jews. They knew that they could not come into the presence of the living God. And here's someone doing what only God can do. It raises a question, doesn't it? The disciples are concerned because here is God incarnate in Jesus Christ. How are they going to survive this? Well, they do, we know that. We've still got a lot of the gospel to go. But they've got a problem, haven't they? Who is this? How do we react to him? Well, how should we react to Jesus? Well, quite simply in 1 Peter 3 and verse 18, we read this. For Christ died for sins, once and for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive by the Spirit. Here's how we react. We come to God in confidence, asking for our wrongdoing to be forgiven. And here's the wonderful thing. Because of that, we don't have to fear coming into the presence of a holy God. A God who has, by the way, the right to judge us for our sin and disobedience. No. We can say the price is paid. And it's been paid by Jesus. Thanks for listening. But just before we go, I want to remind you we're going through Mark's Gospel. So, hey, if you want a free gospel, there's one on the railings outside the church, or you can use my phone number. And if you want to follow any of these other talks, just look on the website and you'll find them in the video section. Thanks for listening again.